Alright guys, how's it going? I moved into a new apartment at the beginning of the month and as usual I massively underestimated the potential for chaos, hence this very late video. You may detect some audio oddities in the meantime while I fix up the acoustics in my studio. But getting on with the video now, and starting with a recap of what I've covered up till this point. It was way back in February when I received leaked information on AMD's next generation server chip, Rome. I have different sources that work within the server industry and as far as I'm aware at least, none of them know each other. All of them told me separately of a new chiplet architecture for Rome. One source mentioned 5 dies, 4 core dies and 1 non-core die, and another explicitly mentioned the chiplets term. There was more information and some of it quite curious, but this is what I was most interested in, and the chiplet idea became the focus of my next video, an Epyc master plan. A few weeks after I launched that video, another source came forward with information that Rome would have not 5 but 9 dies. I wasn't sure what to make of that one, so I filed it under possible and waited for more leaks which could make that possibility a probability. But some months later I recalled a research paper I had read 2 years previously, and that paper became the focus of my video, Interposers, Chiplets and Butter Donuts. In that video, which showed how latencies could be drastically reduced even with 8 and 16 chiplet architectures, I became more convinced that Rome would move to a 9 chiplet architecture instead of the 4 we have today with the current Naples Epyc. However, barely a week later I changed my mind back to a 5 chiplet architecture again, citing a leaker over at Chip Hell, who claimed 16 core chiplets were incoming as the main reason why. I should have stuck with 9 chiplets because it appears that's how many we're gonna see with Rome. This could mean that AMD has kept the same 8 core die layout we see today, with the main difference being instead of having 4 entire chips on Naples, we have 8 chiplets for double the amount of cores and a 9th uncore die. The core chiplets are quite intriguing, but if anything, I'm even more intrigued by what is in the 9th uncore die. I actually discussed the possibility of Intel using different processes for different chiplets. That was in my Intel Going Nowhere Fast video, if indeed they themselves decided to leverage their EMIB technology with their own chiplet architecture. They will be doing that, but more on that later. One interesting fact about Rome's 9 chiplet architecture is the 9th die will actually be fabricated on 14 nanometers, not 7 nanometers. I was told this by one of my sources back in February, and other sources have confirmed this. So it would appear that Rome is 8 7nm core chiplets for up to 64 cores we believe, and a 9th uncore chiplet fabricated on the current 14nm process. Milan, or Zen 3, which follows Rome, will be fully 7nm. You might wonder why AMD would make a decision like that, and the obvious answer would be yield. I expect this 9th 14nm die to be much larger than the 8 7nm chiplets, even if it were 7nm itself I mean, and also, as I mentioned in the Intel Going Nowhere Fast video, certain chip elements just don't scale that well with smaller nodes. For example, I/O, memory controllers, the sort of thing you might expect to see on a non-core chip. Now I did mention curious information at the start of this, and there was something else in particular that stood out. My source claimed that Zen 2 will be a new redesign from the grounds up. Yes, another one only 2 years after Zen. Apparently AMD will be doing away with NUMA altogether with Rome, and the new chip will be capable of handling 32 DIMMs with one socket. 32 times 128GB DIMMs for up to 4TB of RAM per socket. And apparently there is also a roadmap for 4 sockets on one motherboard. Put all that together and we could be looking at new motherboards with 4 banks of 8 DIMMs, possibly even in a cross shape to match the chips on the package, but that's just a guess. Feel free to add your own speculation. Intel's best configuration today on a 2 CPU server is only able to handle a total of 24 DIMMs, and that is only 3TB split between 2 sockets, compared to 4TB on one socket for AMD. My source also said that Zen 2 will go into full production at TSMC in Q1 2019, with mass availability in Q3 of 2019. Again, this was back in February this year, and if anything, I would expect that to be pulled forward by at least 3 months. Now in previous videos and on numerous occasions, I've stated that Intel looks to be completely beaten here. They appear to be stuck on 14nm. Their 10nm issues are well documented by myself, by others, and even Intel themselves. Possibly worse than that is their monolithic architecture, which which will have problems scaling past its current 28 core limit. And let me just go into some detail on that. There are three major variables in chip design, the three major trade-offs of power, performance and area, or PPA for short. All three variables are dependent on the manufacturing process, or manufacturing node, that the chip is made on. We already know that in semiconductor manufacturing, smaller numbers are better. For example, 7nm transistors are better than 14nm transistors because smaller transistors, area, can switch faster, performance, while using less power. It's just a win-win-win. But PPA is a trade-off regardless of the manufacturing node. The faster you switch transistors, that is, the higher the transistor performance, or in simple terms, the higher the clock speed, the more power is used. And obviously where area comes into play is that with larger chips, you can cram in more transistors. So area is tied to power in that more transistors use more power and require more area. Power is tied to performance in that faster transistors require more power, and performance is tied to area in that more transistors means more performance. Generally speaking, going wide and slower uses less power than small and faster, meaning that more cores at lower clock speed, with the same CPU architecture mind, will generally have better performance per watt than less cores at a higher clock speed. Obviously though, this largely depends on how well the software is optimized for multi-core processors. Going wider with more cores, however, has the obvious drawback of larger chip sizes, area, which means you get less chips on a wafer. In other words, larger chips means higher manufacturing costs. So getting back to Intel, who as mentioned have been stuck on 14nm for a long time, when in previous years they'd be increasing core counts fairly steadily, while the manufacturing node improved to a smaller size every couple of years or so. We can see that with this server CPU table here. There is actually a huge jump in core count between Sandy Bridge EP and Ivory Bridge EX. That, however, required a larger die on a smaller node. Imagine the size 15 cores would be on 32nm and you'd be nearer 800 square millimeters. Haswell EX had 3 more cores than Ivy Bridge EX on the same node, so it's no real surprise to see a corresponding increase in die size. 661mm square is really huge for a CPU. The 14nm shrink with Broadwell EX looks very impressive, adding 6 cores with a large reduction in die size. However, with Skylake SP and its now 28 cores on 14nm still, Intel has one of their largest ever dies on the market at nearly 700 square millimeters. That increase over Broadwell cannot be explained by the cores alone, and the change due to Skylake's mesh topology and cache appears to have quite an effect on area. Now the point in all that should hopefully be clear enough. With 14nm, Intel has nothing more to give, either in die area or power and therefore performance. With Skylake SP, they are already at huge area and power numbers, higher than anything before. So without something else, they'll struggle to improve performance over their current offerings, let alone Rome. Regarding which, I also learned back in February that Zen 2, that's Rome server chips, would go all the way up to 225 watts. That's quite an increase on the 180 watts of Zen 1. That is 64 cores, however, remember, a massive increase over anything Intel has. So stuck on 14nm, what can Intel do to remain even semi-relevant? Right now, Skylake SP and Naples are fairly even, depending on workload, but Intel's 14nm is far superior to GlobalFoundries' 14nm. TSMC's 7nm should be far in advance of both of those, however, with AMD's CTO Mark Papermaster claiming over at CRN, 7nm processors will provide double the performance per watt of energy expended in a previous node. And by that I hope he means 14nm and not 28. And also, I think we do have the opportunity to be positioned much stronger than we originally anticipated. But I have to say, our original plan was to be positioned very strongly, so any delay from our competitor could simply strengthen the value that AMD brings to the market. Intel is behind on process and architecture. So far behind that they appear to have around half the performance of AMD at the same power. Put yourself in their shoes and ask, what can possibly be done to salvage this situation? First of all, they need to get at least near competitive on performance. So what can they do? Well, around 3 months ago, I was leaked some information by a news source of an upcoming Intel 14nm dual chip design. It in fact turns out to be a 3-chip design, and like AMD's 9-chip design in that it also contains an I/O die, or a non-core die. So in mid to late 2019, Intel will be introducing Cooper Lake, a hastily added stopgap with one mission: close the performance gap to AMD's Rome at any cost. Intel appear to be trying to catch up with AMD's core count by sticking 2 huge, near 700 square millimeter Skylake SP dies together with EMIB and a presumably much smaller third die. The package must be an incredible size to accommodate all of that. I mean, look at this. AnandTech shot 2 of them in one package. And in August, during Intel's Data-Centric Innovation Summit, executive Navin Shenoy stated that Cooper Lake will generate and deliver a significantly better generation-on-generation performance improvement. That's compared to their own offerings, of course. But note that only performance was stated, not performance per watt. So perhaps it's not all that surprising that TDP is also an eye-watering 350 watts. At least according to Charlie over at Semi-Accurate, who first broke the Cooper Lake name, I believe, and he likely has far more details than I do at this stage. 350 watts is another tier altogether. However, that is still clearly lower than 2 times 205 watts. So perhaps they aren't doing a dual 28-core design for 56 cores total. It may be lower than that. Another, perhaps more reasonable alternative is that Intel's 14nm process has improved again. I think many people forget this, but Intel's Skylake chips were fabbed on 14nm plus. That's the Kaby Lake manufacturing generation. Coffee Lake was 14nm plus, and Intel saw a nice performance per watt uplift from that. So there is clearly room on the table already for Skylake SP to improve. Of course, there are also plenty rumours of a 14nm plus generation, and it's more than likely that Intel is in a real hurry to get their server chips onto this new process as quickly as possible. But in the end, there's only so far that 14nm can possibly go, and it's doing nothing for the huge area requirement of these chips. 56 cores at decent clock speeds will be incredibly fast CPUs and will be capable of beating Rome's 64 cores in some, perhaps even many workloads, but they'll need some very exotic cooling, and the chips will still come with huge TDPs relative to Rome. In the data center, TCO, that is total cost of ownership, is paramount. It's not just about the cost of the chips themselves. Even if the chips themselves cost nearly 10 grand, software licenses per core can also run into thousands of dollars, and also performance per watt matters hugely due to the sheer volume of chips in these data centers. If a Cooper Lake CPU uses 50% more power, just imagine that over thousands of chips, and all of a sudden TCO is much higher than Rome, simply due to the extra power costs. But in the end, if they can be even slightly competitive in performance versus Rome at 50% higher power, that is a hell of a lot better than being half the performance at the same power. What about area though? A couple of huge 14nm dies can't be cheap to manufacture, surely. The reality here though is that actual manufacturing costs to Intel aren't that high, due to them being stuck on 14nm for years now, and most of the major capital and R&D money that goes into that process is long since spent. The silicon costs are nothing to Intel, not considering the huge price tags of these chips. They are having some issues with 14nm supply, however. A few weeks ago, a user over at Reddit posted a rather dramatic sounding HPE, that is Hewlett Packard Enterprise, partner newsflash, mitigating Intel Xeon SP processor supply constraints. HPE, along with all other server vendors, is starting to see supply constraints on the Intel Xeon SP processors, commonly referred to as Skylake, used in our Gen 10 servers. While we do not have a definitive timeframe for all the material constraints to be resolved, HPE supply chain is estimating that we will continue to see shortages of supply and, therefore, potential customer impact due to delayed deliveries through the end of December 2018. And looking at our HPE promise, you can be assured that we are doing everything we can to mitigate supply risk, including recommending alternative platforms. the ProLiant DL385 Gen 10 and ProLiant DL325 Gen 10 servers based on AMD Epyc processors, and also Intel Broadwell-based Gen 9 servers. That one was actually interesting to me, as you're aware that Broadwell is also on 14nm, so this would appear to be a very short-lived measure until stock of those runs out. And looking at that, it's hard to argue with the poster over at the AMD stock Reddit saying, "It's like Christmas every goddamn day." At least it is if you're an AMD shareholder, but more on that one soon. It wasn't long before Dell joined in on the act with their own shortage, and I guess it just shows how far Intel has fallen when DigiTimes claimed that Intel will be manufacturing 14nm chips at TSMC. So what's going on with all that? Well, in a way, it's actually good news for Intel because they are clearly selling everything they can manufacture. Being in demand is a good thing. However, without the ability to meet that demand, they are clearly losing out on a lot of potential revenue. And worse still, if Intel can't supply the chips, then there's obviously only one other company who can. The OEMs literally have to choose between selling more AMD products or selling none at all. Guess which one of those they'll take? There will be a lag, especially in laptops, where as we learned a couple of days ago, Intel is also struggling to meet demand, but there will be a lag because it takes time to get CPUs from AMD and build the complete systems around them. But it is quite likely that AMD will be the major beneficiary of Intel's inability to meet demand. Intel do have the easy option of raising prices, which appears to be what they've done, with many of their chips now retailing far beyond initial MSRP and very high price tags on their upcoming 9th generation. And the final chapter of the Christmas Everyday theme is Intel also appear unable to shake off security vulnerabilities, with the latest one being Foreshadow. AMD claims their chips aren't affected. Hits like these would have knocked out most companies months ago, but Intel is a giant and that's the only reason they are still standing after taking all of these hits. But it's not all doom and gloom though, as over at the next platform we learned that Cascade Lake, that's basically Skylake X refresh for the same 28 core count, coming next by Intel. That has been chosen for the Texas Advanced Computing Center's 2019 Frontera system. There were a few interesting tidbits in this one, most notably this. TAC made the decision to go with the Cascade Lake SKUs that have the higher clock rates and they expect most codes will run significantly faster. His team took a close look at other processor options, including the 7nm AMD Rome Epyc chips coming next year, which he says were a closer frontrunner in their decision-making process. We took a look at AMD Epyc, both Naples and certainly Rome, but with a combination of price, schedules and performance, we felt that Cascade Lake was the way to get the best value right now. Our codes were just a little better for the time we needed this system, but Rome is a promising architecture and we expect it is going to be a very good chip. I think the keyword here is schedules, with serious Rome availability coming in perhaps 6 months or more later than Cascade Lake. But nevertheless, it's a good win for Intel, which is something we don't hear a lot these days. Now getting back to AMD, and something I had intended to make a short video about when it finally happened. However, it happened so fast during the last week, I just didn't have time in between the move and this longish video. Just under 6 weeks ago, I launched this video, AMD Q2 2018 Analysis from Rags to Riches. In that video, I mentioned how I believed AMD's $10 stock price some 15 months prior to that seemed very low to me, and that I expected them to be $20 within a year. That didn't quite happen within a year, but it did happen 3 months later. So with this video 6 weeks ago, I then decided to play it a bit more cautiously and said that I saw no reason why AMD wouldn't hit $30. At that time, more than 50% upside within 6 to 9 months. Well, at the beginning of this week, AMD hit $30 and in fact went as high as $34 before looking a little bit overstretched and falling back to the $30 mark. Not even 6 weeks later, let alone 6 months. After I launched this video, a few people grumbled about it. Don't do these kinds of videos, they said. It's too boring, etc. I get it. You want me to talk about the tech instead of the financial stuff. On the other hand, I got comments like this one recently. I am 50 years old and don't have much money. I would barely classify as middle class if I would at that. After your last episode, I convinced my ex-wife to buy some AMD shares for her son from his saving account. She eventually agreed to do so, and then this viewer also bought 100 shares for him and 100 shares for his second son. He opened up a necessary banking account to do it, and the bank manager advised him against it, but he went ahead and bought the shares at $18.10. They just hit $28 and he is ecstatic. Thank you very much for your accurate review you gave and very nice prediction. I am happy that I took your advice and acted upon it. There's an awful lot of people making an awful lot of money on AMD stock right now, and my videos are helping them make that decision. That is why I made them, and I will continue to do so. But let me just quickly and firmly state that at no time did I offer anyone advice on buying stocks, AMD or otherwise. I gain nothing from that, and I just get blamed when it goes in the opposite direction. I just told you how I believed it was likely to go based on a bunch of factors that we just discussed. Those being Rome's likely performance and Intel's continuing security issues. At this point 6 weeks ago, I didn't realise that they'd also have a 14nm shortage on their hands. So please don't take my word as law on this, and don't risk money you can't afford to lose. There are various factors that can affect stock prices, and if I knew for sure, I'd have put my entire savings on AMD years ago when they were under $2. This latest run from $20 to beyond $30 happened very quickly, and the reasons for that again could be many and varied. It's possible, probable even, that Rome's performance is starting to be passed around some of the big money guys who can afford to pay for this kind of information. We saw with Ryzen a couple of years ago when the stock rose from $2 to, what was it, 12 or 14 bucks over a year. That was a huge percentage increase based on the potential of Ryzen. A simple bandwagon effect cannot be discounted either, with price target upgrades every day culminating on Lisa Su appearing on Jim Cramer's show and appearing very confident and competent, I must say. So there is a bandwagon effect in play, I'm pretty sure of that. But I was also told by another source that numbers AMD are showing, presumably in servers, are better than what Intel has to offer for the next 2 years. And that, of course, doesn't mean Intel will have caught up in 2 years' time, because I assure you, AMD will have moved on by some distance by then. I've got their server roadmap until 2021. And let me just state again that I do not personally hold any AMD stock, although it's not hard to wish I had bought in at $2, $10, and even at $20. So make no mistake about this, it's not about me trying to pump AMD stock here. So with all that in mind, is it worth buying AMD now at around the $30 mark? That one is up to you. Right now, my feeling is it could go to either $20 or $40 within weeks again. I know which one I feel is more likely, but that is all I'm saying on this for now. So to finish this one up, in some ways this type of video may feel like I'm neglecting the heart of what the channel was all about, even a couple of years ago. I talk a lot about server space and financials because these are incredibly important over the long haul. So I've moved on from being just a gamer, though gaming is still a major interest. GPU is interesting. We have ray tracing coming, for example, though right now it's a little bit one-sided. But in CPU, things are actually looking quite, dare I say, good. And obviously I give Intel hell. In my opinion, almost all of it justifiably, for a lot of their stunts. But looking at the next year from them, and it's quite exciting to see what they'll do, for the simple reason that they'll have to do everything they can to stave off Zen 2. Regarding Coffee Lake Refresh and the i9-9900K especially, that one should be a clear win over Ryzen 2000. I see no way for AMD to compete in performance there until 7nm, though sadly the prices of those Coffee Lake Refresh parts wouldn't be difficult to compete with. Will we see a 2800X from AMD? In my opinion, no we won't, as AMD has nothing left to offer with 12nm, and any 2800X would be an extremely minor upgrade on the 2700X. What about 10 cores and all that? Not a chance in hell, not with their current Zen Plus architecture. And I got thinking about the whole situation with servers and PC. Intel are in a hell of a lot of trouble in servers, that is assured. But as we just learned, they'll pull out every stop and spare no expense in order to save as much market share as they can. But the tech gap is huge. Cooper Lake may look like a sad attempt at remaining viable, but it will work simply due to the huge performance increase over Skylake's measly 28 cores, and many companies won't even consider switching to Epyc, at least not for the next couple of years. The desktop could still be a win for Intel though. People are more forgiving of an extra 50 watts or even 100 watts, so long as the performance is there too. And there's still a chance that Zen 2, the Ryzen 3000, built at TSMC now for sure remember, may not quite reach the required clock speeds to take on even the 9900K. Obviously in performance per watt terms, Ryzen 3000 series will be streets ahead of any 14nm Intel architecture. And I'm quite sure it will be 16 cores versus 8 cores. But we've rapidly reached that does anyone care point on the desktop, and AMD will only get so much more mileage out of those extra core counts before the press all collectively agree that, nope, nobody really cares. It's sad in a way that most apps, mostly games anyway, still aren't taking full advantage of all those extra cores yet. It will come of course, both AMD and Intel now have 6 core mainstream parts, so of course it will come. It's just taking time. So what looked like a total disaster for Intel in 2019 will likely end up only a minor disaster. They can salvage something out of winning in the PC again, comfortably, at least until Ryzen 3000 launches, which I believe will be later next year. And you know what? I am content with that. Yes, I do feel Intel should be punished for decades of transgressions against consumers and a whole bunch of smaller corporations. And they are about to be punished. But as we've seen with their shortages, even at 14nm, there is more than enough demand to go around. Both of these companies can win at the same time because all these markets, data center, gaming, even AI, continue to grow. The only questions left are, how far will Intel go this time to prevent AMD getting their fair share? And have they already made too many missteps, too many bad plays, making it now too late to matter anyway? I'll catch you later, guys.